In the summer of 1878, in the high country of Colorado Territory, a man could still disappear into the mountains and leave civilization behind. Some went looking for gold, some went running from the law, and some, like Reuben McAllister, went looking for nothing at all except silence and solitude. But the mountains have a way of giving you what you need, not what you want. And on a hot July morning, when the sun turned the pine needles to copper and the air hung thick with the scent of sap and dust, Red McAllister was about to find something that would change everything. He didn't know it yet, didn't know that before the week was out, he'd be fighting for his life and someone else's too. Didn't know that the woman he was about to find would teach him that some things are worth more than safety, more than peace, more than all the silence in the world. All he knew riding along that ridge above Pine Valley with his rifle across his saddle and his thoughts 1,000 miles away was that something felt wrong. The discovery, the ravens told him first. Red had been checking his trap line along the eastern slope of Pine Ridge, the same route he'd ridden every 3 days for the past 2 years. He knew every rock outcrop, every game trail, every Douglas fir that grew crooked from fighting the wind. He knew which springs ran cold even in August and where the elk came down to water at dawn. This was his country now, the only place that felt like home since he'd lost everything that mattered. But today, the ravens were acting strange. 3 of them circled over a clearing about half a mile east, their calls harsh and insistent. Not the lazy afternoon croaking of birds at rest, but the urgent cries that meant something was wrong. Something was dying or already dead. Red reined in his horse, a sturdy sorrel mare named Ginger, and pulled the brass spyglass from his saddlebag. The glass had belonged to his father back in County Galway, one of the few things the family had saved when they fled the famine. Red had carried it through the war, through the years of wandering afterward, through the brief, happy time with Mary and the children, and through the 3 years of mourning that followed. He extended the glass and swept it across the clearing. At first, he saw only granite boulders and scrub pine. Then his view caught something that made his breath stop in his chest. 4 wooden stakes driven into the ground in a square pattern, and in the center, a human figure. Red's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough cruelty in his 37 years to recognize it from a distance. During the war, he'd been an Army scout in Apache territory, and he knew their ways, both the honorable and the harsh. This had the marks of a formal execution. He could ride away, should ride away, probably. Whatever tribal justice was being carried out down there was none of his business. He'd spent 3 years avoiding other people's problems, avoiding other people entirely. The mountains didn't judge, didn't demand, didn't take away the things you loved. But even as he thought it, his hand was already moving to his rifle, checking the load by habit. And Ginger, sensing the change in him, was already starting down the slope before he consciously made the decision to go. Some choices, Red had learned, aren't really choices at all. The rescue, it took him 10 minutes to reach the clearing, moving carefully through the pine forest, every sense alert for watchers. The ravens had gone silent now, perched in the trees like black judges waiting for a verdict. Up close, the scene was worse than he'd imagined, but also different. The woman wasn't buried as he'd half expected from stories he'd heard. Instead, she was tied to the 4 stakes, spread out in the shape of an X, her wrists and ankles bound with rawhide. She wore a simple deerskin dress, torn and dusty. Her long black hair hung forward, obscuring her face. Around her neck hung a wooden placard with Apache symbols carved deep into the grain. Red dismounted 20 yards out and approached on foot, rifle ready. He'd been ambushed before and wasn't eager to repeat the experience. But the clearing was empty except for the woman and the watching ravens. She lifted her head as he approached, and he saw her face for the first time. Mid-20s, he guessed. High cheekbones, dark eyes that should have been dulled with fear and exhaustion, but instead burned with something fiercer. Pride, maybe, or pure, stubborn will. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something passed between them that Red couldn't name. Recognition, though they'd never met. Understanding, though they spoke no common language yet. A silent acknowledgement that this was a crossroads, that what happened in the next few minutes would matter. Red knelt beside her and drew his hunting knife, the blade worn smooth from years of use. The placard around her neck read, in English words carved below the Apache symbols, "Barren woman, leave to die." A cold fury settled in Red's chest. He'd seen men hanged for murder, shot for theft, imprisoned for crimes real and imagined. But to condemn a woman to slow death by exposure for the crime of being unable to bear children? That was cruelty that made his Irish blood boil. He cut the rawhide at her left wrist first, then moved to her right. Her arms dropped heavily, and he saw her wince as circulation returned in painful pins and needles. When he moved to her ankles, she spoke for the first time, her voice hoarse from thirst. The words were Apache, fluid and musical despite her condition. He didn't understand them, but the tone was clear enough. She wasn't pleading, wasn't thanking him either. She was asking a question, maybe asking why. Red finished cutting the last binding and stood, offering his hand to help her up. She hesitated, studying his face with those fierce dark eyes, then accepted. Her grip was weak, her legs unsteady, but she pulled herself upright through sheer determination. How long had she been tied here? A day? 2 days? Long enough that her lips were cracked and bleeding, her face burned dark by the relentless mountain sun. Red unslung his canteen and held it out. She took it with both hands and drank deeply, water spilling down her chin. After a long moment, she lowered the canteen and met his eyes again. This time, her expression held something that might have been gratitude, though pride kept it from her face. That's when the whistle came. It was a sound Red knew well, a high piercing note that carried across distance, an Apache signal, and it came from the ridge above them. His training took over instantly. Red grabbed the woman's arm and pulled her toward Ginger, who stood ground-tied 30 yards away. She stumbled, weak from her ordeal, but kept pace as best she could. They were halfway to the horse when 5 warriors appeared on the ridgeline, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sky. They didn't charge, didn't knock arrows or raise rifles. They simply stood there, watching. Red stopped, pulling the woman behind him, his rifle coming up to his shoulder in one smooth motion. At this range, he could drop 2 of them before they reached cover. Maybe 3 if they were foolish enough to charge across open ground. But that would leave 2, and he'd be reloading while they closed the distance. The lead warrior took 3 steps forward, coming clear of the shadows. He was tall and powerfully built, his face painted with the marks of a fighter. He wore his hair long and carried a Winchester rifle with the ease of a man who knew how to use it. The warrior spoke, his English broken but understandable. "You interfere with tribal justice, white man." Red's finger rested on the trigger, but he didn't squeeze. Not yet. "I interfere with murder," Red called back, his voice carrying across the clearing. "There's a difference. She is judged by medicine man, she is cursed, brings death to our people." "She's a woman who's done you no harm," Red said. "You want to kill her? You'll have to go through me first." The warrior studied him for a long moment. Behind Red, the woman spoke again in Apache, her voice stronger now, though still rasping. The warrior's face hardened at whatever she said. "You take her, you take curse," the warrior said. "Blood will follow." Then, with no further warning, he turned and melted back into the trees. The other 4 warriors followed, disappearing like smoke in wind. Red waited a full minute, scanning the ridgeline and the tree shadows, before he lowered his rifle. The woman beside him swayed, and he realized she'd been holding herself upright through pure force of will. Now that the immediate danger had passed, her strength was failing. He caught her as she started to fall, surprised by how light she was. The muscles of her arms and shoulders suggested strength, but she weighed almost nothing. They'd been starving her before the sentence was carried out, weakening her body before exposing it to the elements. Red lifted her easily and carried her to Ginger. The horse, bless her steady heart, didn't spook at the smell of another human or the strange situation. Red settled the woman across the saddle, then swung up behind her, one arm holding her steady against his chest. "Hold on," he said quietly, knowing she probably didn't understand the words but hoping the tone would carry meaning. "Just hold on." Then he turned Ginger's head toward home and rode. The cabin, Red's cabin, sat in a fold of the mountains about 5 miles from where he'd found the woman, tucked into a natural shelter where a granite overhang provided protection from the north wind. He'd built it himself 3 years ago, when the pain of staying in Denver, with its memories, had become unbearable. The structure was solid pine logs chinked with mud and moss, with a stone fireplace at one end and oiled paper windows that let in light without inviting the cold. It wasn't much, but it was his, the only place in the world where he could breathe without feeling like he was drowning in grief. The woman stirred as they approached, her head lifting from where it rested against his shoulder. She said something in Apache, a question by the tone. "Almost there," Red answered in English, knowing the tone was more important than the words. "You're safe now, or as safe as anywhere gets in these mountains." He dismounted in front of the cabin and lifted her down carefully. She tried to stand on her own, but her legs buckled. Red caught her again and carried her inside, kicking the door open with his boot. The interior was dim and cool, a welcome relief from the afternoon heat. Red's few possessions were neatly arranged: a rope bed against one wall with a bearskin blanket, a table he'd built from split logs, two chairs, shelves holding his supplies and cookware. Pelts from his trap line hung from the rafters, curing in the dry mountain air. His spare rifle stood in the corner, and above the fireplace hung a small framed daguerreotype. The faces faded but still recognizable to anyone who knew what to look for. Red carried the woman to the bed and lowered her onto it gently. She watched him with unwavering attention, tracking his every movement, still assessing, still deciding whether he was salvation or just a different kind of threat. He moved to the water barrel by the door and dipped a tin cup, then brought it to her. She took it in both hands and drank more slowly this time, though he could see the effort it cost her to pace herself. When she'd emptied the cup, she handed it back and spoke again in Apache. The words were different this time, softer. Maybe thanks, maybe just acknowledgement. Red set the cup aside and studied her more carefully now that they were out of immediate danger. The burns on her face from the sun would heal, though they'd be painful for days. Her wrists and ankles bore raw marks from the rawhide bindings, but those would heal too. The real question was what other damage had been done. Dehydration, exposure, possible infection. He needed to get water into her and food if she could stomach it. Then rest. The body could heal most things if given time and resources. Red went to the fireplace and stirred up the coals, adding kindling to bring the fire back to life. He hung his cooking pot on the iron hook and poured in water from the barrel, then added strips of dried venison and wild onions. Not much, but it would make a thin broth that her stomach could handle. While the water heated, he pulled his spare clothes from the wooden chest at the foot of the bed. Wool trousers, a cotton shirt, thick socks. They'd swim on her, but they were clean and whole, which was more than could be said for what she was wearing. He placed them on the table near the bed and pointed, then gestured to himself and to the door. She understood immediately and nodded once. Red stepped outside and closed the door behind him, giving her privacy to change. He stood on the small porch he'd built, looking out at the valley below where the evening shadows were starting to lengthen. Ginger stood nearby, still saddled, and he moved to unsaddle her and lead her to the small corral behind the cabin. As he worked, removing the saddle and brushing Ginger down, Red found his mind racing through possibilities and consequences. Those warriors would be back, almost certainly. And not just them. If she'd been sentenced by a medicine man and a tribal council, they wouldn't let her go easily. It would be seen as defiance of their laws, of their spiritual authority, and Red had just become part of that defiance. He should probably take her to the territorial marshal in Timber Falls, hand her over to the law. Let the white man's justice system sort it out. Except the territorial marshal was Dutch Keller, and Dutch was in the pocket of every cattle baron and timber boss between here and Denver. Dutch wouldn't see a wronged woman. He'd see a legal problem and a threat to the delicate peace between the settlers and the Apache. He'd hand her right back to her people to avoid trouble, so that option was out. Which left Red exactly where he was, alone in the mountains with a woman he couldn't communicate with, who was being hunted by her own people, with no plan and no idea what to do next. It was the most alive he'd felt in 3 years. First evening. By the time Red returned to the cabin, full dark had fallen and the mountain cold was settling in. He knocked once on his own door, a courtesy, before entering. The woman had changed into his spare clothes and was sitting on the edge of the bed, the bearskin blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The wool trousers were rolled up at the cuffs and belted tight with a length of rope. The shirt hung loose, making her look even smaller than she was. But her eyes were alert now, the water and the shelter already working their restorative magic. Red moved to the fireplace and ladled broth into two wooden bowls. He carried one to her and sat down at the table with the other, deliberately putting distance between them. She needed to know he wasn't a threat, that she had space to breathe and recover. She looked at the bowl in her hands, then at him, a question in her eyes. "Eat," Red said, miming the motion of bringing a spoon to his mouth. "It'll help." She understood the gesture, if not the words, and began to eat slowly, carefully. Red watched from the corner of his eye while pretending to focus on his own meal. She had good survival instincts. Not gulping the food despite obvious hunger, testing it first, letting her stomach adjust. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the night wind in the pines outside. When she'd finished half the bowl, she set it aside and spoke, pointing to herself. "Kimamela. A name. Her name." Red nodded and pointed to himself. "Reuben McAllister. But most folks call me Red on account of the hair." He tugged at his copper-colored beard. She tried the name, her accent making it sound different, softer. "Red." "Close enough," Red said with a slight smile. "Red it is." "Red," she repeated, more confidently this time. Then she said something longer in Apache, gesturing to the cabin, to him, to herself. He caught the tone, if not the meaning, a question about what happens next. "I don't know," Red said honestly. "Haven't figured that part out yet, but you're safe here tonight. That's something." She studied him for a long moment, those dark eyes seeming to look right through to his bones. Then she spoke again, pointing to the daguerreotype above the fireplace. Even in the dim light, it was clear enough. A man and woman with two small children. Red's throat tightened. "My family. Wife Mary. My son Daniel, he was 6. Daughter Rose, 4. Fever took them 3 years back. All 3 in the same week." Kimamela didn't understand the words, but she understood the pain. It was written in his voice, in the set of his shoulders. She reached out and touched his hand briefly, a gesture of recognition. She knew loss too. Anyone sentenced to die alone knew loss. Red cleared his throat and stood, collecting the bowls. "You should rest. Take the bed. I'll sleep on the floor by the fire." He mimed sleep, pointing to the bed, then to the floor. She shook her head firmly and pointed the opposite way. Him to the bed, her to the floor. "You're injured and exhausted," Red said. "You need proper rest." She pointed again, more insistently. Her message was clear. She wouldn't take his bed. Red sighed. Stubborn woman. But he recognized that stubbornness. It was pride, the same pride that had kept her chin up when she was tied to those stakes. She wouldn't be a burden, wouldn't take charity she couldn't repay. "Fine," Red said, "but you get the bearskin. I've got blankets." He pulled the bearskin from the bed and laid it on the floor near the fire, then added his spare blanket. She watched him with approval and settled onto the makeshift bed with a small sigh of relief. Red banked the fire for the night and lay down on the rope bed, still fully dressed except for his boots. He'd sleep light tonight, one ear always listening for trouble. Those warriors might not wait until morning to come back. But as the minutes passed and Kimamela's breathing evened into sleep, Red found himself staring at the dark ceiling, his mind too active for rest. He'd broken his isolation today, invited conflict and danger back into his carefully constructed solitude. And for what? For a woman he couldn't even talk to, who belonged to a people that might see her rescue as theft or worse. But when he closed his eyes, he saw her face again, as it had been in that clearing. The fierce determination not to beg or plead. The pride that refused to be broken even in the face of death. He'd seen that same look on Mary's face during the worst of the fever, when she knew she was dying but was determined to do it with dignity. Seen it on his own face in the mirror during the dark months after, when he'd had to decide whether to keep living or follow them into whatever came next. Sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was simply refuse to surrender. Red finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, his hand resting on the rifle beside the bed. Second morning, Red woke to the smell of coffee brewing and sat up with a start, his hand going automatically to his rifle. Then he saw Kimamela at the fireplace, feeding wood into the flames, his battered coffee pot hanging from the hook. She turned at the sound of his movement and made a small gesture that might have been an apology or just acknowledgement. She'd found his coffee stores and figured out the pot. The woman was a fast learner. Red swung his legs off the bed and pulled on his boots. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning," she echoed, testing the word. Then she pointed to the coffee pot and made a questioning gesture. "Yeah, coffee's good. Thank you." Red moved to the water barrel and splashed his face, the cold mountain water driving away the last cobwebs of sleep. When he turned back, Kimimela had poured coffee into 2 tin cups and was holding one out to him. He took it with a nod of thanks and sat at the table. The coffee was strong and bitter, the way he liked it. She'd made it perfectly, despite never having used his pot before. They drank in companionable silence for a few minutes, the morning light filtering through the oiled paper windows. Red found himself studying her in the better light. The burns on her face were angry red, but already forming the beginning of new skin underneath. She moved stiffly, her muscles protesting yesterday's ordeal, but she moved. She'd be sore for days, but she'd heal. When they'd finished the coffee, Kimimela stood and pointed outside, then mimed eating. "Hungry?" Red asked. "Yeah, me too. Let's see what we can scrounge up." He led the way outside into the cool mountain morning. The sun was just clearing the eastern peaks, painting everything gold and green. Ginger nickered a greeting from the corral, and Red's 2 other horses, a gelding named Buck and an old mule called Molly, came to the fence looking for breakfast. Kimimela went straight to Ginger and ran her hands over the mare's legs with the careful attention of someone who knew horses. She found the small wound on Ginger's right foreleg, a cut from a sharp rock 3 days ago that Red had been meaning to treat but kept forgetting. She looked at Red and pointed to the wound, then to the forest, making gathering motions. "You know how to treat that?" Red asked. She nodded firmly and headed toward the tree line. Red followed, curious to see what she'd do. Kimimela moved through the forest with the confidence of someone who'd spent her whole life reading the land. She found what she was looking for within minutes, a stand of willow trees near a small spring. She pulled her borrowed knife from her belt and cut strips of bark, peeling them carefully. Then she found another plant, something with broad leaves that Red didn't recognize, and gathered a handful. Back at the cabin, she crushed the willow bark and leaves together in Red's stone mortar, adding a little water to make a paste. She applied it to Ginger's cut with gentle, practiced hands, then tore a strip from the bottom of her borrowed shirt and bound the wound. Red watched in admiration. "You're a healer." She looked at him, not understanding the word but picking up the approval in his tone. She smiled, a real smile this time, and pointed to herself. "Kimimela." Then she pointed to the poultice and said another Apache word he didn't catch, medicine probably, or healer. "That's a gift," Red said, "a real gift. Thank you." The morning was cool but pleasant, and they fell into an easy routine of chores. Red chopped wood while Kimimela carried water from the spring, filling the barrel. They worked side by side, communicating more through gesture and glance than words. Red found himself relaxing in her presence in a way he hadn't with another person in years. Maybe it was because they couldn't have complicated conversations. Maybe it was because she asked nothing of him except the space to exist. Or maybe it was simply that she understood loss the way he did, carried it the same way. Not as a weight that crushed, but as a scar that taught. Around mid-morning, as Red was restacking firewood, he heard her laugh. The sound was so unexpected that he turned quickly, wondering what had caused it. Kimimela was pointing at him and making exaggerated chopping motions, then pointing to the pile of wood he'd just stacked. It took him a moment to realize she was teasing him. The pile was crooked, leaning slightly to one side. Red looked at his work and had to admit she was right. "Yeah, well, Mary always said I couldn't stack wood worth a damn either." He restacked it properly while Kimimela watched with amusement in her eyes. When he finished, she nodded approval and went back to her own work. It was such a normal moment, so domestic and peaceful, that Red felt something crack open in his chest. Something that had been frozen solid for 3 years. Not healed, not fixed, but just beginning to thaw. Maybe, he thought, maybe there was life on the other side of grief after all. The threat returns. They were eating a simple lunch of Johnny cakes and the last of the venison when Red heard it. The sound of horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving at a walk. not trying to hide their presence. Red's hand moved to his rifle before he was fully aware of making the decision. Kimimela saw the movement and her body tensed, her eyes going to the door. "Stay inside," Red said quietly, "away from the windows." She understood the tone if not the words, and moved to the corner of the cabin where she'd be out of sight from outside. Red noticed she'd picked up the hunting knife from the table. Good instincts. Red stepped outside onto the porch, his rifle held loosely but ready. 4 riders came into view around the bend in the trail. 3 men in the rough clothes of frontier settlers and 1 better-dressed man on a fine bay horse. The leader was immediately recognizable, even though Red had never met him face to face. Marshal Dutch Keller had the look of a man who'd been handsome once but had let it go to seed. Hard living and harder choices had carved deep lines around his mouth and eyes. He wore his badge pinned prominently to his vest, a statement of authority. Behind him rode 2 deputies Red had seen around Timber Falls, men who'd follow orders without asking too many questions. But it was the 4th man who drew Red's attention and held it. Victor Grayson sat his expensive horse with the ease of someone who'd never done a day's hard labor in his life. His suit was fine wool, his boots polished leather. Everything about him said money and power. He was in his early 50s, Red guessed, with steel gray hair and cold eyes that assessed everything like a balance sheet. Dutch Keller raised one hand in a gesture of peace as they approached. "Reuben McAllister, heard you were living up here. Thought maybe we should have a conversation." Red stayed on the porch, the rifle across his chest. "Marshal, what brings you all the way up the mountain?" "Business," Dutch said. "Unpleasant business. Heard you interfered with an Apache execution yesterday." "Heard that, did you? News travels fast." Victor Grayson urged his horse forward a few steps. When he spoke, his voice was cultured, educated, the voice of a man used to getting his way. "Mr. McAllister, I'm Victor Grayson. Perhaps you've heard of my lumber operations in the valley." "Can't say I have. Don't get down to the valley much." "No, I suppose you wouldn't." Grayson's eyes traveled over the cabin, the small corral, the modest setup. "Living as a hermit has its appeals, I imagine. But it also means you might not understand the complexities of the situation you have stumbled into." "Try me," Red said flatly. "That woman you took from the Apache execution grounds is part of a very delicate arrangement. Chief stands tall and I have an agreement. In exchange for certain considerations, including hunting rights and firearms, the tribe was to deliver that particular woman to me." Red's grip tightened on his rifle. "Why would you want an Apache woman sentenced to death?" "Because she represents an opportunity," Grayson said simply. "The tribe views her as cursed, worthless. But to me, she's valuable. With her in my possession, I can negotiate exclusive timber rights to certain Apache lands. Those lands are worth approximately $50,000 in lumber. So you see, Mr. McAllister, you haven't just rescued a woman. You've stolen a very valuable piece of property." The casual cruelty of it, the cold calculation, sent hot rage through Red's veins, but he kept his voice level. "She's not property, she's a person." "In the eyes of the law," Dutch interjected, "she's a fugitive from tribal justice. I'm authorized by the territorial governor to maintain peace between settlers and natives. That means respecting their legal systems, even when we might not agree with them." "So you're here to take her back," Red said. It wasn't a question. "We're here to restore order," Dutch said. "Nobody needs to get hurt. Just hand over the woman and we'll be on our way." Red stood silent for a long moment, weighing options and consequences. He could fight, but 4 against 1 were bad odds, especially when one of them was the law, however corrupt. He could surrender Kimimela and go back to his solitary life, wash his hands of the whole mess. Or he could do what Mary would have wanted him to do, what his father, rest his soul, would have expected of him. The right thing, regardless of cost. "She's under my protection," Red said clearly. "She stays." Grayson's face hardened. "I've invested considerable money in this arrangement, Mr. McAllister. That woman represents a return on my investment." "Then your investment's gone bad. She's not leaving." Dutch shifted in his saddle, his hand moving closer to the pistol at his hip. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Red. You're 1 man, we're 4, and that's before we talk about the Apache warriors who want her back too." Then I guess we're at an impasse. You're willing to die for some Indian woman you just met? Grayson asked, genuine puzzlement in his voice. Red thought about Mary and the children, thought about the man he'd been before grief hollowed him out, thought about Kimamela's fierce pride in that clearing, refusing to beg or break. I'm willing to die for what's right, he said simply. There's a difference. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then Grayson smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Very noble, Mr. McAllister, but nobility doesn't win wars. Consider this your warning. We'll be back. With more men. Think carefully about whether one woman is worth everything you've built here. He turned his horse without waiting for a response. Dutch lingered a moment longer, his expression hard to read. You're making powerful enemies, Red. Grayson owns half the valley. He's got the territorial governor in his pocket and enough hired guns to start a small war. This won't end well for you. Probably not, Red agreed, but I've been dead inside for 3 years anyway. Might as well die standing up for something. Dutch shook his head slowly, something like respect flickering in his eyes. Then he turned and followed Grayson and the deputies back down the trail. Red waited until they were out of sight before he lowered the rifle and let out a long breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Behind him, the cabin door opened and Kimamela emerged, still gripping the knife. She looked at him with a question in her eyes, though she'd probably understood the confrontation well enough from tone and body language. Red turned to face her fully. They want to take you back, trade you to your people like your livestock. I told them no. She studied his face, reading something there. Then she spoke in Apache, words that sounded both like a warning and a question. Yes, they'll be back, Red answered, understanding her meaning if not her words. With more men, maybe tomorrow. Maybe the day after, but definitely coming back. Kimimela pointed to herself, then to the mountains, making a gesture of leaving. No, Red said firmly, you don't have to run. We'll figure this out. Together. She shook her head, clearly torn. Her face showed the internal struggle between survival instinct and whatever was growing between them, between running to save him and staying to prove she wasn't worthless. Red stepped closer and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Listen to me. Kimmy, listen. I've run from things before. Lost my family and ran all the way up here to hide from the pain. And you know what? The pain followed me anyway. Running doesn't work. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood his earnestness. She placed her hand over his, a gesture of acknowledgement. So we don't run, Red continued. We prepare, we fight if we have to, but we do it together. You understand? Together. Together, she repeated carefully, testing the English word. Then she said something in Apache that ended with determination in her voice. Whatever she'd said, it was a commitment. Red nodded. Good. Then let's get to work. We've got maybe 3 days before they come back with force. In 3 days, I'm going to teach you everything I know about staying alive in a fight. He went to the cabin and returned with his spare pistol, a Colt revolver he'd carried during the war. He checked the cylinder, loaded it, and held it out to her. Kimamela took the weapon hesitantly, feeling its weight. She'd clearly never held a firearm before. The gun looked huge in her hands. Red moved behind her and positioned her stance, feet shoulder-width apart, both hands on the grip, arms extended. Point, he said, guiding her aim toward a dead tree stump 50 yards away. Then squeeze, slow and steady. She nodded, her face set with concentration. When she pulled the trigger, the recoil knocked her back a step and the bullet went wide, kicking up dirt 10 feet to the right of the target. Red steadied her. That's okay. First time's always rough. Try again. They spent the rest of the afternoon practicing. By the time the sun started to set, Kimimela could hit the target 1 time out of every 5 shots. Not good enough for a real fight, but a start, a foundation to build on. As darkness fell and they headed back to the cabin, Red found himself thinking about the next 3 days, about what he could teach her and what she needed to learn, about the fight that was surely coming and whether either of them would survive it. But more than that, he found himself thinking about the strange partnership forming between them. 2 people from different worlds, connected by nothing except shared loss and a stubborn refusal to quit. Maybe that would be enough. Maybe it wouldn't. Either way, Red McAllister was done running. Whatever came next, he'd face it standing still. Inside the cabin, as Kimimela settled onto her bedroll by the fire, Red sat at the table and cleaned his rifles with practiced care. Tomorrow he'd teach her to ride fast. The day after, basic hand-to-hand fighting. And all through it, she'd teach him too. How to heal with plants, how to read the land, how to hope again. Outside, the mountain night settled and cold and clear. Stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and somewhere in the darkness, enemies plotted and prepared. But for tonight, in this small circle of firelight, two broken people had found something neither expected. A reason to fight, a reason to live. And that, Red thought, as sleep finally claimed him, was more than he'd had yesterday. The training days, dawn broke cold and clear over Pine Valley, painting the high peaks pink and gold. Red was already awake, had been for an hour, preparing for the day ahead. He'd spent the quiet pre-dawn time checking ammunition stores, cleaning weapons, and mentally cataloging everything they'd need for what was coming. 3 days, maybe less if Grayson was more impatient than calculating. 3 days to turn a woman who'd never fired a gun into someone who could defend herself. 3 days to prepare for a fight against men who killed for money and saw human life as just another commodity to be traded. It should have felt impossible. Maybe it was impossible. But Red had learned during the war that impossible just meant you had to be smarter, faster, and more determined than the other side. And if there was one thing Kimimela had in abundance, it was determination. She woke as he was making coffee, sitting up on her bedroll with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent her life sleeping on the ground. Her dark hair was tangled from sleep, and the burns on her face looked angry in the morning light, but her eyes were alert and focused. "Morning," Red said, pouring coffee into 2 cups. "Big day ahead. You ready to learn how to fight?" She understood the tone, if not all the words, and nodded firmly. Whatever happened, she wouldn't be the weak link. Red could see that resolve written in every line of her body. They drank their coffee quickly, then Red led her outside where the morning air was sharp enough to sting the lungs. The horses greeted them with soft nickers, breath steaming in the cold. Red went to the small shed beside the corral and emerged with an armload of supplies. Rope, a worn leather saddle, his spare rifle, ammunition, and a cloth sack filled with what looked like rocks. "First lesson," Red said, gesturing to Ginger. "Riding. Not just sitting pretty on a horse, but riding like your life depends on it, because it might." He saddled Ginger with practiced efficiency while Kimimela watched, absorbing every movement. Apache women rode, he knew that much, but he didn't know if she'd had much experience with it. Her people's way with horses was different from the white man's way, based more on partnership than dominance. When Ginger was ready, Red helped Kimimela mount, adjusting the stirrups for her shorter legs. She sat the horse well, her posture natural, her hands gentle on the reins. "Good," Red said approvingly. "You've ridden before." She said something in Apache that probably confirmed it, then demonstrated by urging Ginger into a smooth walk around the corral. The mare responded to her touch like they'd been partners for years. Red nodded, mentally adjusting his training plan. She didn't need to learn the basics. She needed to learn combat riding, how to shoot from horseback, how to control a panicked animal under fire, how to use the horse as cover and weapon. "All right, Russ," he said, opening the corral gate. "Let's see what you can really do." For the next 2 hours, Red pushed her hard. He taught her to ride at full gallop through the pine forest, ducking branches and navigating obstacles. He showed her how to reload a pistol while moving, how to aim from a moving platform, how to make herself a smaller target by lying low along the horse's neck. Kimimela took to it like she'd been born for it. She had the Apache gift with horses, that intuitive understanding of how the animal thought and moved. But she also had something else, fearlessness born from having already faced death and survived. By mid-morning, she could hit a stationary target 3 times out of 10 while riding at a canter. Not great odds, but better than nothing. And more importantly, she'd learned not to freeze when the gun kicked or the horse spooked. They took a break by the stream that fed Red's water barrel. Kimimela dismounted and went immediately to check Ginger's legs, running her hands over them with a healer's care. Red watched her work and felt something shift in his chest. She wasn't just learning to survive. She was caring for the tools of survival, treating the horse with respect and gratitude. Mary had been like that, gentle with animals, fierce with everything else. Red shook off the memory before it could pull him under and focused on the next lesson. Tracking, he said, pointing to his own eyes and then to the ground. You know tracking? Kimmy Mella's face lit up with something close to excitement. She did know tracking. She gestured for him to follow and led him along the stream bank, pointing out signs he'd have missed. The faint impression of deer hooves in the soft mud, the place where a raccoon had washed its food, the scratches on a tree where a bear had marked its territory. Then she surprised him by gesturing for him to show her what he knew. Red took her into the forest and demonstrated the tracking methods he'd learned as an Army Scout. How to judge the age of a track by the sharpness of its edges, how to read broken twigs and disturbed pine needles, how to tell if someone was moving normally or trying to hide their trail. They worked together for over an hour, teaching and learning from each other. Kimmy Mella showed him Apache methods, using all the senses, not just sight, listening for the warning calls of birds, smelling the air for smoke or sweat or the distinctive scent of horses, feeling changes in air pressure that might mean a storm coming or a large group moving nearby. Red showed her settler tricks, using a blade of grass held loosely between the fingers to feel vibrations in the ground, reading the behavior of insects, understanding how different soil types held tracks. By the time they returned to the cabin for lunch, Red realized something important. They were becoming partners, not just protector and protected, but equals bringing different knowledge to a shared purpose. It changed everything. Over a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Red noticed Kimmy Mella studying the daguerreotype above the fireplace again. She pointed to it and spoke a question in Apache. Red looked at the faded image of his family. Mary, he said, touching the woman's face in the picture. My wife, 3 years gone. He moved his finger to the children. Daniel, Rose, both gone the same week. Fever took them all. He paused, the old grief rising like a tide, then forced himself to continue. I couldn't save them. Couldn't do anything but watch them die. That's why I came up here. Couldn't stand to be in that house with all their things and none of them. Kimimela listened to his tone, understanding pain even without understanding words. She reached across the table and placed her hand on his, a gesture of shared sorrow. Then she spoke in Apache, her voice soft but steady. Red didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. She was telling him about her own loss, about the husband who'd thrown her away rather than question the medicine man, about the 3 years of growing shame and isolation as her belly remained flat while other women's grew round, about the moment they'd come for her with ropes and stakes and judgment. I'm sorry, Red said quietly. Sorry you went through that. Sorry your people couldn't see what I can see clear as day. You're worth 10 of them. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood him. A small smile crossed her face, the first real smile he'd seen from her. Then she pointed to him and said something in Apache that ended with a word that sounded like a question. Why did I save you? Red translated, guessing at her meaning. Because I couldn't let you die. Simple as that. Been a lot of dying in my life. Wasn't going to stand by and let there be more if I could stop it. Kimimela nodded slowly, then said one word in English that she'd clearly been practicing. Good. Red smiled back. Yeah, good. The moment was broken by a sound from outside. Horses approaching, but just one or two by the sound of it. Red's hand went to his rifle, but Kimimela touched his arm and shook her head. She'd heard something in the cadence of the hoofbeats that told her this wasn't a threat. Red moved to the window and looked out. 2 riders were coming up the trail, an older man on a sturdy bay horse and a younger man on a paint. Neither wore the look of hired guns. The older man had a prosperous, settled appearance, while the younger one had the mixed features that marked him as half Indian, half white. Well, Red said, relaxing slightly, looks like we might have visitors of a different sort. He stepped onto the porch, rifle held loosely but visible. The 2 riders stopped a respectful distance away, the older man raising one hand in greeting. Reuben McAllister, he called. I'm Samuel Brennan, run the general store in Timber Falls. This here's John Talltree, the town blacksmith. We heard you might be in need of friends. Red studied them for a long moment, his instincts weighing and measuring. Sam Brennan he knew by reputation, an Irish immigrant who'd made good in the Colorado Territory, honest as the day was long, and no friend of bullies or land grabbers. John Taltree, he'd seen once or twice in town, a quiet man who kept to himself but was respected by both the white settlers and the Apache. "What makes you think I need friends?" Red asked carefully. Sam smiled, the expression crinkling the weathered skin around his eyes. "Because Dutch Keller was in my store yesterday buying rope and ammunition, and Victor Grayson was with him, looking mighty pleased with himself. And because the whole town knows what you did up on Pine Ridge 3 days ago." News travels fast. Always does in a small town. Sam gestured to the cabin. "Mind if we step down? Long ride up here and I'm not as young as I used to be." Red considered, then nodded. "Come ahead, but know that I'm not handing over the woman if that's what you're here for." "Wouldn't dream of asking," Sam said, dismounting with a grunt. "We're here to help, not hinder." Red led them inside where Kimmy Mella stood by the far wall, the hunting knife in her hand though held low and unthreatening. Her eyes tracked the visitors with the wariness of a wild thing. John Taltree spoke first, his words in fluid Apache. Kimmy Mella's eyes widened in surprise. Then she responded rapidly, her whole body language changing. Here was someone she could actually communicate with. They spoke for several minutes while Red and Sam watched. Finally, John turned to Red and translated. "She says her name is Kimamela, which means butterfly. She was wife to a warrior named Chayton. After 3 years without children, the medicine man White Cloud declared her barren and cursed. The tribe sentenced her to death by exposure. She says you saved her life and she is in your debt." "She owes me nothing," Red said firmly. "Did what anyone decent would do." John translated, and Kimamela shook her head firmly, speaking again. "She says not anyone," John continued. "Many white men would have left her or taken advantage. You did neither. She says you have honor." Red felt his face warm. "Tell her I just did what was right." While John translated, Sam pulled a cloth-wrapped package from his coat. "Brought supplies," he said. "Bandages, salve for those burns, some proper food, and information." "What kind of information?" Sam's face grew serious. "The bad kind. Grayson's hired 8 more guns from Denver. They arrived yesterday, mean-looking bunch, led by a man named Jesse Cobb. You know the name?" Red's jaw tightened. He knew the name. Jesse Cobb had made a reputation during the range wars in Wyoming, hired by cattle barons to drive out homesteaders. He was fast, professional, and completely without conscience. Men who crossed him tended to end up dead. "Yeah, I know him. He's expensive." "Grayson's paying top dollar," Sam confirmed, "which means he's serious about getting that woman back. The whole town's talking about it. Most folks are scared to take sides, but there's a handful of us who think what Grayson's doing is wrong, trading human beings like they're cattle." "So you're here to help?" Red asked, still wary despite wanting to believe. "We are," Sam said. "Me, John here, Dr. Thomas Rivers, and a few others. Maybe 7 or 8 total who are willing to stand against Grayson." John spoke up. "I have connections in the Apache camps. Not all of them agree with the medicine man's judgment. Some of the women especially think this was wrong. And there's an elder named Red Skywalker who's been questioning White Cloud's visions for years." Red felt the first stirring of something he hadn't felt in 3 days. Hope. "So we might not be completely alone in this." "Not alone at all," Sam said, "but we need a plan. Grayson's not going to wait long to make his move. Maybe 2 more days, 33 at most. And when he comes, he'll come hard." They spent the next hour planning. Sam laid out what he knew about Grayson's operations. The lumber mill, the bribes to territorial officials, the network of corruption that let him operate with impunity. John shared what he'd learned from his Apache contacts, that Chayton was being pressured by White Cloud to retrieve his former wife, that the tribe had made a deal with Grayson, trading Kimimela for rifles and hunting rights, that not everyone in the tribe supported the arrangement, but few were willing to speak against the medicine man. Kimimela listened through John's translations, her face growing harder with each revelation. When John finished, she spoke at length, her voice tight with controlled anger. "She says," John translated carefully, "that she wants to face them. Not hide, not run. She wants to go before her people and prove she's not cursed. Show them the blood that came back." He paused, clearly uncomfortable. "She wants to expose the medicine man as a fraud." Red leaned forward. "That's dangerous. If she's wrong, if the tribe doesn't listen, they'll kill her." "She knows," John said, But she says living in hiding is not living. Better to die speaking truth than live in shame. Red looked at Kimmy Mella, seeing the fierce determination in her face. It was the same look she'd had tied to those stakes. She'd already made her decision. Then we help her do it right, Red said. A formal tribunal. Witnesses from both sides. Make it public so Grayson can't just grab her and disappear. Sam nodded thoughtfully. That could work. If we do it in a neutral place, with enough witnesses, Grayson would have to back off or risk showing his hand. And if the Apache see proof she's not cursed, they might withdraw their support for his schemes. Eagle Canyon, John suggested. Sacred ground to the Apache, but close enough to town that settlers can reach it. 3 miles from here. We could gather both communities there. When? Red asked. Soon, Sam said. Before Grayson makes his move. Day after tomorrow. Red looked at Kimmy Mella. Through John, he asked if she'd be ready. She nodded without hesitation. Day after tomorrow, then, Red agreed. But we need to be ready for Grayson to try something before then. He's not going to let this play out peacefully if he can help it. They spent another hour working out details. Sam would ride back to town and quietly spread word among the settlers who might support them. John would use smoke signals to contact the Apache camps, requesting a formal council meeting. Dr. Rivers would document Kimmy Mella's medical condition, providing scientific evidence against the curse claim. As they prepared to leave, Sam pulled Red aside. I knew Mary, he said quietly. Sold her cloth for baby clothes back before. She was a good woman. Would be proud of what you're doing here. Red's throat tightened. Or she'd think I'm a fool for risking everything for a stranger. She'd know you're doing it because it's right. That's who you are, Red. Who you've always been. The mountain didn't change that. Just buried it for a while. After Sam and John rode out, Red and Kimmy Mella returned to training with renewed urgency. They had one more full day to prepare, and Red meant to use every minute of it. The second day. The next day dawned with high clouds and a wind that smelled of rain. Red woke to find Kimmy Mella already outside, practicing her shooting. He watched from the doorway as she fired the pistol at the dead stump, her stance better now, her hands steadier. She hit the target twice out of 5 shots. Getting better. Red made coffee and brought her a cup. She accepted it gratefully, her hands wrapped around the warm tin. Her face was healing well, the angry red burns fading to pink. The salve Sam had brought was working. Today we learned to fight up close, Red said, setting down his coffee and gesturing for her to do the same. Sometimes you don't have time to shoot. Sometimes the fight comes to you fast and mean. He demonstrated basic hand-to-hand combat, how to use an attacker's weight against them, how to strike vulnerable points, how to break free from a grab. Kimmy Mella absorbed it all with intense focus, then insisted on practicing immediately. They spent an hour grappling in the clearing beside the cabin, Red showing her moves and letting her practice on him. She was quick and strong despite her size, and she had a natural fighter's instinct for finding weaknesses. At one point, she managed to flip Red onto his back using a move he'd just taught her. She stood over him, breathing hard, a look of surprised triumph on her face. Red laughed, a sound that felt rusty in his chest. Good. That's good. You're a natural fighter, Kimmy. She helped him up, and they continued training. But now there was a new energy between them, the satisfaction of partnership, of teaching and learning working both ways. Around midday, as they paused to eat, Kimmy Mella suddenly went still, her head cocked like she was listening to something Red couldn't hear. Then she pointed toward the forest to the east. Red grabbed his rifle and moved to the tree line. At first he saw nothing, then movement caught his eye. 3 men were working their way through the forest, trying to stay hidden, but not doing a great job of it. Grayson's men. Scouts probably, checking the lay of the land before the main attack. Red turned to Kimmy Mella and gestured, Stay here. Stay hidden. She shook her head firmly and picked up her pistol. Her message was clear. We're partners or we're nothing. Red didn't have time to argue. The scouts were getting closer, would see the cabin soon. He made a quick decision and led Kimmy Mella into the forest, circling around to come at the scouts from the side. They moved silently through the pines, Kimmy Mella matching Red's pace step for step. Her Apache training showed in the way she placed her feet, avoiding twigs and dry leaves without conscious thought. They got within 30 yards of the scouts before Red deliberately stepped on a branch, the crack echoing through the quiet forest. The three men spun toward the sound, hands going to their guns. Red had his rifle aimed before they cleared leather. "That's far enough," he called. "You boys are trespassing." The leader, a lean man with a scar across his jaw, sized up the situation quickly. "Just passing through, friend. No harm meant. You're passing through with guns drawn and eyes on my cabin. That's not friendly. That's scouting for an attack. Don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't. Tell Grayson I got his message. Tell him I'm not scared and I'm not backing down. And tell him next time he sends scouts, I won't be so polite." The scarred man's eyes flicked to Kimamela, who stood beside Red with her pistol aimed steady at the second scout. Something like recognition crossed his face. "That's the Apache woman. Grayson wants her bad. Grayson can want all he likes. She's under my protection." "Your funeral," the man said. But he was already backing away, his hands carefully away from his gun. "Come on, boys. We got what we came for." The three men melted back into the forest. Red waited a full 5 minutes before lowering his rifle. "That was stupid," he said to Kimimela, though his tone held more admiration than criticism. "Could have gotten yourself killed." She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone and smiled slightly. Then she holstered her pistol and headed back toward the cabin. Red followed, his mind racing. The scouts meant Grayson was almost ready to move. Tomorrow at the latest, maybe even tonight if he was feeling bold. The tribunal at Eagle Canyon needed to happen soon. Very soon. They spent the rest of the afternoon reinforcing their preparations. Red checked every weapon twice, counted ammunition, positioned supplies where they could be grabbed quickly. Kimamela practiced her shooting until her hands ached, then helped him strengthen the cabin's defenses. By the time evening shadows stretched long across the valley, a tense quiet had settled over them both. The kind of quiet that comes before storms. The revelation. That evening, as Red was checking his weapons one more time, Kimimela approached him with something in her hand. She held it out to him, a piece of cloth stained with dried blood. She spoke in Apache, pointing to herself, to the cloth, to her belly. Her meaning was clear, even without translation. "Moonblood," Red said, understanding flooding through him. It came back. She nodded vigorously and spoke more rapidly, her face alight with something between vindication and rage. The medicine man had been wrong. She wasn't cursed. She wasn't barren. Her body worked as it should. 3 years of shame, 3 years of being blamed, and finally being sentenced to death, all based on a lie. Red felt his own anger rising on her behalf. "They need to see this," he said, gesturing to the cloth. "At the tribunal. Proof." She nodded and tucked the cloth carefully into her clothing. Then she spoke again, her tone different now, softer. Through gesture and the few English words she'd learned, she managed to convey her meaning, thank you. Not just for saving her life, but for seeing her as a person, for believing she had worth when her own people had declared her worthless. Red found himself at a loss for words. He settled for placing a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of solidarity and respect. "You're brave," he said, "braver than most men I know. Your people were fools to throw you away. Their loss." She touched his hand briefly, then stepped back. But something had shifted between them in that moment. A deeper understanding, a mutual recognition of each other's pain and strength. That night, as they prepared for sleep, Red found himself thinking about the next day, about the risks they were taking and the slim chance of success. But more than that, he thought about what Kimamela had taught him over the past 3 days. That survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about having something worth surviving for. And that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was stand up and fight, even when the odds were impossible. Especially then, the night before, Red woke in the deep hours before dawn to the sound of footsteps on the porch. He had his rifle in his hands and was moving toward the door before he was fully conscious. But the knock that came was careful, respectful, not the sound of attack. Red opened the door to find John Talltree standing in the darkness, his horse tied to the porch rail. "Trouble," John said without preamble. "Need to talk." Red let him in. Kimimela was already awake, the knife in her hand. She relaxed slightly when she saw John, but remained alert. John spoke rapidly in Apache to Kimamela, then turned to Red. Change of plans. Chayton came to Grayson today. Made a deal. Red's gut clenched. What kind of deal? Chayton helps Grayson capture Kimamela. Grayson gives the tribe 10 rifles instead of 20. Chayton thinks he can restore his honor by bringing his former wife back for proper execution. Kimamela's face had gone hard as stone as John translated for her. She spoke sharply, her words cutting. She says Chayton is a coward, John translated. That he chose pride over love, chose easy answers over hard truth. She says he deserves no honor. Does he know about the tribunal tomorrow? He does now. Grayson told him. They're planning to attack before dawn, capture her before she can speak publicly. Red processed this quickly. How many men? Chayton and 3 warriors, plus Grayson's 8 hired guns, plus Dutch and his deputies. Maybe 15 total. Hell, Red ran a hand through his hair. We can't fight off 15 men. Not here. Too exposed. That's why we moved the tribunal up, John said. Tonight, right now, I've already sent runners to the Apache camps and to the settlers. Everyone who was coming tomorrow will come tonight instead. We gather at Eagle Canyon before Grayson can organize his attack. It was risky. Rushing the tribunal meant less time to prepare, fewer witnesses, less chance of success. But it also meant taking the initiative instead of waiting to be attacked. Red looked at Kimamela. Even without translation, she'd understood the essentials. Her face showed fear, but also determination. She nodded once. Tonight then, Red said. How long do we have? 2 hours before people start gathering. 3 hours until enough witnesses are there to make it legitimate. Then we better get moving. The journey. They rode out within 20 minutes, Red on Ginger, Kimamela on Buck, and John on his paint horse leading the way. The trail to Eagle Canyon wound through dense forest and across 2 creek crossings, treacherous in full daylight and potentially deadly in darkness. But the moon was bright, and John knew every twist of the path. They made good time, covering 3 miles in under an hour. Eagle Canyon lived up to its name. A natural amphitheater of red stone walls rose on 3 sides, with the 4th open to the valley below. Ancient petroglyphs marked the walls, Apache symbols speaking of gatherings and judgments dating back generations. This was sacred ground, neutral ground, where disputes were settled and truths were spoken. Already people were arriving. Red counted maybe 20 so far, split evenly between Apache and settlers. Sam Brennan was there with Dr. Rivers, and Red recognized Beth Corrigan, the widow who ran the boarding house in Timber Falls. On the Apache side, he saw mostly women and older men, with a few young warriors standing at respectful attention. And in the center of the gathering space, an ancient Apache elder sat on a blanket, his face weathered like the canyon walls themselves. Red Sky Walker, John had called him, the elder who questioned the medicine man's visions. Kimamela dismounted and stood still for a moment, taking in the scene. This was her moment. Everything she'd survived had led to this. Red moved to stand beside her. You ready? She looked at him and said one word in English. Ready. They walked together into the canyon, and the gathered witnesses turned to watch. The tribunal was about to begin. In the firelight, Red could see faces both friendly and hostile. Some held hope in their eyes. Others held judgment already written. Kimamela's hand found his for just a moment, her fingers squeezing once before letting go. A touch that said, whatever comes, we face it together. And then they stepped forward into the light, into the circle where truth and lies would battle, and only one could survive. The canyon filled slowly with witnesses as the night deepened. Firelight flickered against the ancient stone walls, casting dancing shadows over the petroglyphs that had watched countless gatherings over hundreds of years. The air was thick with tension and the scent of pine smoke. Red stood beside Kimamela at the edge of the gathering space, watching as more people arrived. The Apache came in small groups, women mostly, their faces hidden in shadow, but their presence speaking volumes. Not everyone in the tribe agreed with White Cloud's judgment. Not everyone thought a woman should die for failing to bear children. The settlers came too. Beth Corrigan arrived with 3 other women from Timber Falls, all of them wearing their best dresses despite the late hour and the rough journey. Dr. Rivers stood with Sam Brennan, both men looking grim but determined. A handful of miners and shopkeepers clustered together, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to back down. And then, with theatrical timing, Medicine Man White Cloud arrived. He was older than Red had expected, perhaps 70 winters, his face a map of wrinkles and his eyes clouded with cataracts. He wore ceremonial dress decorated with beads and feathers, and he carried a staff topped with eagle feathers and small bones that rattled as he walked. Two younger medicine men flanked him, supporting his steps. White Cloud moved to the center of the gathering space and raised his staff. The murmuring conversations fell silent. Even those who didn't believe in his visions respected the ritual of this moment. Red Skywalker, the ancient elder John had mentioned, rose from his blanket with surprising grace for a man who had to be in his 70s. He was rail-thin, his hair white as snow, but his voice when he spoke carried the authority of a man who'd earned his place through wisdom rather than fear. John Taltree moved to the center to translate, positioning himself where both groups could hear him clearly. "We gather for truth," Red Skywalker said, his Apache words translated immediately by John. "This is sacred ground. Here, the spirits hear all words. Speak lies and the spirits will know. Speak truth and the spirits will honor it." White Cloud struck his staff against the stone, the bones rattling. "This woman returns. This is forbidden. She was judged by vision and ceremony. She brings curse to our people." Kimimela stepped forward before anyone else could speak. Her movement was sudden enough that several Apache warriors moved their hands toward their weapons, but Red Skywalker raised his palm in a gesture of peace. "Let her speak," the old elder said. "She has earned that right." Kimimela stood in the firelight, small and somehow enormous at the same time. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady, carrying no trace of the fear she must have felt. John translated as she spoke. "I am Kimimela, daughter of Morning Star, wife of Chaitin. 3 years I tried to give him children. 3 years my body gave nothing. Medicine Man said I was cursed. Said spirits marked me barren. Said I brought death to our people." She paused, letting the words settle. Around the gathering space, people leaned forward, drawn into her story. "I believed him. For 3 years I believed I was worthless. I believed when other women whispered. I believed when Chaitin took new wife. I believed when they tied me to stakes and left me for sun and thirst and death." Her voice grew harder now, edged with steel. But Medicine Man lied. Gasps rippled through the Apache side of the gathering. No one accused a Medicine Man of lying. It was unthinkable. White Cloud struck his staff again, louder. "The woman speaks against spirits, against visions sent by ancestors." "The woman speaks truth," Kimimela shot back, her voice rising. She reached into her clothing and pulled out the blood-stained cloth, holding it high so the firelight caught it. "Moonblood came 7 days ago, first time in 3 years. I am not cursed. I am not barren. Your vision was wrong." The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye in the canyon fixed on that piece of cloth, on the undeniable proof it represented. White Cloud's face contorted with rage, or possibly fear. "Old blood, trick, animal blood." "Then test it," Red Skywalker said calmly. He gestured to 3 Apache elder women sitting near the fire. "These women know woman's blood from animal blood. Let them examine." The 3 women rose and approached Kimimela. They took the cloth with ceremony, passing it between them, examining it closely, even smelling it. They spoke among themselves in low voices, then turned to face White Cloud. The oldest of the 3, a woman whose face held a lifetime of hard-won wisdom, spoke clearly. "This is woman's moon blood. Fresh, no more than 7 days old. Truth, not trick." White Cloud staggered as if struck. His younger attendants caught him before he fell. Kimimela pressed her advantage. "I was examined before sentence. Elder sage woman said I was healthy. Medicine Man said her eyes were too old, ignored her. I heard 3 other women in tribe, same story. No child for many years, then child came. But Medicine Man said I was different, said I was cursed special." She turned to address the gathered Apache women directly. "How many of you waited long time for baby? 3 years? 4 years? 5? Were you cursed Or did spirits just take their time? Murmurs of recognition spread through the women. One stood, then another, then three more, each one speaking brief testimonies of waiting years before children came, of being told they were cursed or unlucky, only to eventually conceive. White Cloud's staff shook in his hands. Visions do not lie. I saw darkness around this woman. Perhaps you saw darkness, Red Skywalker said gently. But perhaps you interpreted wrong. Perhaps darkness was not curse on her. Perhaps darkness was what we would do to her. The old medicine man's face crumbled. For the first time, doubt showed in his clouded eyes. Red had been watching this unfold with growing hope, but movement at the canyon entrance caught his attention. Riders approaching, many of them. His hand moved to his rifle, even as he called out, "Company coming!" The ambush. Victor Grayson rode into the canyon at the head of 15 armed men. Dutch Keller was at his right hand, looking uncomfortable but committed. Jesse Cobb and his hired guns spread out in a practice formation, cutting off the main exit. And behind them came 4 Apache warriors led by a tall man Red recognized from the clearing where he'd found Kimamela. Chayton, her former husband. Grayson dismounted with theatrical flair, his fine coat swirling around him. "What a touching scene," he said, his cultured voice carrying across the canyon. "A criminal confessing her crimes. But I'm afraid this unauthorized gathering is over." Red Skywalker rose to his full height, somehow seeming to tower over the mounted men despite his age. "This is sacred ground. You bring weapons here. This is forbidden." "I bring justice," Grayson countered. "That woman is property of the Apache tribe, legally traded to me in exchange for valuable considerations. She's also a fugitive from lawful execution. Marshal Keller here has the authority to arrest her and anyone harboring her." Dutch cleared his throat awkwardly. "It's true. Territorial law says I have to respect tribal justice systems. And if the tribe sentenced her to death and Mr. Grayson has a legal claim, then I'm obligated to enforce it. Even when the judgment was wrong." De Rivers stepped forward, his Boston accent marking him as an outsider, but his bearing that of an educated man. "I'm a physician. I've examined this woman thoroughly. There is nothing physically wrong with her. No curse, no barrenness, no medical reason she couldn't conceive. The only thing wrong was a medicine man's faulty interpretation." "With respect, doctor," Grayson said with false politeness, "Apache spiritual matters aren't subject to white medical opinion. Now, miss, if you'd come along peacefully, we can settle this without anyone getting hurt." He started toward Kimamela, hand outstretched like he was calling a horse. Red moved to block his path, rifle held across his chest. "She's not going anywhere." Grayson stopped, his smile never wavering. "Mr. McAllister, always the hero. Tell me, is one woman really worth dying for? Because that's where this ends if you don't step aside. Already told you once, I'll die for what's right, and what you're doing here is about as wrong as it gets." "I'm doing business," Grayson said, his smile finally fading. "Legal business. That woman represents $50,000 in timber contracts. I've paid good money to chiefs, to medicine men, to the territorial governor's office. I own the rights to her. Legally." "You can't own a person," Sam Brennan called out. "We fought a war to establish that not 10 years ago." "She's not a citizen," Grayson countered. "She's an Indian on tribal land, subject to tribal law. And tribal law says she dies." He turned to Chayton, switching to broken Apache. "You, warrior, take your wife. Finish what should have been finished." Chayton dismounted slowly. He walked toward Kimamela, his face unreadable. The gathering held its collective breath. Kimamela stood her ground, chin lifted, eyes locked on her former husband's face. When he was close enough, she spoke, her voice carrying across the canyon. John translated in real time. "You come for me again, Chayton? Still choose easy path? Still let others decide for you?" Chayton stopped. Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or shame. "Medicine man said you were cursed," he replied in Apache. "What else could I believe?" "You could believe in me," Kimamela said, her voice cracking slightly. "You could question, you could fight for me, but you chose new wife before I was even buried. You chose pride over love. You chose belief over truth." "I am warrior." I follow tribe law. You are coward, Kimamela said flatly. You follow easy answers because hard truth scares you. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Several Apache warriors sucked in sharp breaths. No woman spoke to a warrior this way. It was unthinkable. But Chayton didn't strike her or shout back. Instead, his shoulders sagged. The fight seemed to drain out of him. Show me, he said quietly. Show me proof you are not cursed. Kimamela gestured to the three elder women who still held the bloodstained cloth. They brought it to Chayton, speaking in low voices about what they determined. Chayton examined the cloth, his face growing more conflicted with each passing moment. Finally, he looked up at White Cloud. Medicine man, he called in a voice that carried. Is it possible you were wrong? White Cloud's staff trembled in his hands. Visions do not lie. But medicine men are human, Red Skywalker interjected. Humans make mistakes. I say this with respect, old friend. Your eyes grow dim, your visions grow unclear. Perhaps it is time to admit that your sight is not what it once was. I will not be questioned. White Cloud struck his staff against the stone with enough force that it cracked, the bones scattering. The symbolism was lost on no one. In that moment of distraction, Grayson made his move. He drew a concealed pistol and grabbed Kimamela from behind, the barrel pressed to her temple. Enough theater, he snarled, all pretense of civility gone. The woman comes with me or she dies right here. Choose quickly. Red's rifle came up, but Grayson was using Kimamela as a shield. No clean shot. Drop the rifle, McAllister. Drop it or she dies. Red's finger rested on the trigger, his mind racing through impossible angles. He couldn't make the shot. Not without risking Kimamela. Slowly hating every second of it, he lowered the rifle. Good, Grayson said. Now kick it away. And the rest of you stay back or I swear I'll put a bullet in her pretty head and salvage what I can from this disaster. The canyon had gone silent except for the crackle of the fires and the sound of Grayson's breathing. He was backing toward his horse, dragging Kimamela with him, the pistol never wavering from her temple. Red felt helpless rage boiling in his chest. After everything, after the rescue, in the training, in the journey here, it was going to end with Grayson winning, with Kimamela taken or dead. But he'd forgotten something crucial. He'd forgotten what 3 days of training had taught her. Kimamela went suddenly limp, dead weight in Grayson's arms. His grip loosened for just a fraction of a second as he tried to hold her up. It was enough. She drove her elbow back into his stomach with all the force Red had taught her to use. Grayson's breath exploded out in a whoosh, and his gun hand wavered. Kimamela grabbed his wrist with both hands, twisting it using the leverage technique they'd practiced in the clearing beside Red's cabin. The pistol clattered to the stone as Grayson howled in pain. Kimamela rolled away from him, coming up in a crouch with the hunting knife suddenly in her hand. The canyon erupted into chaos. Jesse Cobb and his hired guns drew their weapons, but they were surrounded by armed Apache warriors and settlers who'd been waiting for any excuse. Gunfire cracked against the stone walls, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Red scooped up his rifle and fired in one smooth motion, taking down a hired gun who'd aimed at Sam Brennan. He worked the lever and fired again, providing cover for Dr. Baumum, Rivers, and Beth Corrigan as they scrambled for shelter behind the rocks. John Taltree had produced a rifle from somewhere and was firing methodically, each shot carefully aimed. One of Cobb's men went down, then another. The Apache warriors had joined the fight, but Red couldn't tell at first which side they were on. Then he saw one warrior shoot at a hired gun who was aiming at Kimamela, and he understood. They were defending sacred ground from outsiders. Whatever their feelings about Kimamela's sentence, they wouldn't let white hired guns desecrate this place. Chayton stood frozen in the middle of the chaos, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. A hired gun came at him from the side, pistol raised. Chayton moved on pure instinct, his knife flashing. The hired gun dropped, and then Chayton was moving toward Kimamela, who was facing off against Grayson. The lumber baron had recovered his pistol and was advancing on her, murder in his eyes. "You've cost me everything," Grayson screamed over the gunfire. "Every dollar, every plan, every deal. I'll see you dead if it's the last thing I do." He raised the pistol, finger tightening on the trigger. Chayton hit him from the side in a full-body tackle, driving him to the ground. The gun fired wildly, the bullet sparking off stone somewhere above. The two men rolled, fighting for control of the weapon. Chayton was younger and stronger, but Grayson fought with the desperation of a man watching his empire crumble. The pistol went off again, the report echoing like thunder. Both men went still. Chayton rose slowly, blood spreading across his shirt from a wound in his side. But he was standing. Grayson lay on the stone, a hole in his chest, his eyes already glazing over. "You shot me," Chayton said to no one in particular, his voice carrying wonder and pain. "Tried to kill woman. Shot me instead." He looked at Kimimela, standing a few feet away with the knife still in her hand. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Not love, that was long dead, but understanding maybe, or closure. "I was wrong," Chayton said in Apache, his words translated by John even as the firefight continued around them. "Medicine man wrong, I was wrong. You deserve better husband, better man." Then his knees buckled and he collapsed. The turning. The shot that ended the battle came from an unexpected source. Marshal Dutch Keller had been standing at the canyon entrance, looking more and more uncomfortable as the fight progressed. When Jesse Cobb raised his rifle to shoot Red in the back, Dutch made his choice. He drew his marshal's revolver and shot Jesse Cobb through the shoulder. The hired killer dropped his rifle with a scream of pain and rage. "This is over," Dutch shouted, his voice carrying with the authority of his badge. "Everyone stand down, now!" The remaining hired guns, seeing their leader down and their employer dead, threw down their weapons. The Apache warriors lowered their bows and rifles. The settlers emerged from cover, checking each other for wounds. Red moved immediately to where Kimimela knelt beside Chayton. Dr. Rivers was already there, his medical bag open, working to staunch the bleeding. "How bad?" Red asked. "Bad enough," Rivers said. "Bullet went through his side. Might have clipped something important. He needs surgery, needs it soon." Chayton's eyes focused on Kimimela's face. He spoke in Apache, his voice weak but clear. "He says," John translated, kneeling beside them, "that he knows he can't undo what he did. Can't take back the sentence or the shame. But he wants you to know he sees the truth now. Sees you were never cursed, only he was cursed, with pride and weakness." Kimimela's face was unreadable. She placed one hand on Chayton's shoulder, a gesture that could have meant forgiveness or just acknowledgement. She spoke briefly in Apache. "She says," John translated, "that she forgives him for herself, but he must live differently. Must teach his son that women are not to blame for men's failures. Must tell the truth to his children. Must be better than he was." Chayton nodded, wincing at the pain. "I will, I swear it." Red Skywalker approached, moving with slow dignity despite the violence that had just erupted. He looked down at Grayson's body without emotion, then turned to address the gathered witnesses. "White Cloud," he called. "Come, we must speak truth now, no more hiding." The old medicine man approached reluctantly, supported by his attendants. His face held defeat and fear in equal measure. "You made mistake," Red Skywalker said gently. "Human mistake. Your eyes dim, your vision's unclear. But you would not admit weakness, would not question yourself, and woman nearly died for your pride." White Cloud's shoulders sagged. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I saw darkness. I thought it meant curse. Perhaps you saw darkness of what we would do. Not what she was, but what we were capable of." Red Skywalker turned to face the full gathering, his voice strengthening. "I say medicine man must retire. I say his visions no longer serve people. I say Kimimela is not cursed, never was cursed, and tribe owes her life debt." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the Apache witnesses. Even the warriors nodded, their respect for Red Skywalker overriding their loyalty to White Cloud. White Cloud removed the medicine pouch from around his neck. His hands shook as he held it out. "I am sorry," he said, looking at Kimimela. "I was wrong. I sentenced innocent woman. I cannot undo this, but I can admit truth." Kimimela stood and approached him. For a long moment, she simply looked at him, this man whose words had condemned her to death. Then she did something no one expected. She took the medicine pouch gently and hung it back around his neck. "Keep it," she said in Apache, John translating. "Not because you deserve it, but because admitting you were wrong takes courage too. Teach others to question. Teach others that even medicine men can be mistaken. That is how you repay me." White Cloud's eyes filled with tears. He nodded, unable to speak. Dutch Keller cleared his throat loudly, drawing all eyes to him. "Well," he said, clearly uncomfortable with the attention, "I suppose I owe some explanations. Victor Grayson was paying me to look the other way on a lot of things. Bribery, corruption, probably half a dozen territorial laws broken. I went along because the money was good, and I told myself I was keeping the peace." He looked at Red. "But shooting a man into the back crosses a line I'm not willing to cross. I saw what you were doing here, McAllister. Saw you stand up for what's right even when it would have been easier to walk away. Made me remember why I took this badge in the first place." Dutch pulled the marshal's badge from his vest and looked at it for a long moment. "I'm turning myself in to the territorial governor. Confessing everything. Grayson's operations, the bribes, all of it. But first I'm going to make sure justice is served here." He turned to the surviving hired guns, now disarmed and sitting under guard. "You boys are under arrest for attempted murder, assault on sacred ground, and conspiracy. You'll stand trial in Denver." Sam Brennan stepped forward. "And we'll testify. All of us. Make sure the truth comes out about what Grayson was doing." "Truth," Red Skywalker echoed. "Yes, truth must be told, in both our people's ways." The canyon emptied slowly as the night gave way to dawn. The wounded were tended to, the dead were prepared for burial according to their customs. Chayton was loaded onto a travois, still alive but unconscious, as Dr. Rivers and Apache healers worked together to save him. Red found Kimimela sitting alone on a rock outcrop overlooking the valley, watching the sun rise over the mountains. He settled beside her, close enough for companionship, but not so close as to intrude. They sat in silence for a while, both of them processing everything that had happened. The fight, the revelations, the vindication. Finally, Kimimela spoke. The English words came slowly but clearly, evidence of how much she'd learned in just a few days. "Free now," she said. "Tribes say not cursed. Medicine men admit wrong. I am free." "You are," Red agreed. "You can go back to your people if you want. They'd welcome you now." She turned to look at him, her dark eyes searching his face. "You want me go?" "No," Red said honestly, "but it's not about what I want. It's about what's right for you." Kimimela was quiet for a moment, considering. Then she said something in Apache, paused, and worked to translate it into English. "My people bury me alive. Let me die for medicine man's mistake. White man save me. Teach me fight. Stand with me when everyone else turn away." She placed her hand over his. "You are my people now. Cabin is my home. If you let me stay." Red felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been frozen solid since Mary and the children died. "I'd like that," he said quietly. "I'd like that a lot." They watched the sunrise together, the valley below turning gold and green as the light spread. Behind them, the canyon was emptying as people returned to their lives, carrying with them the story of what had happened here. It would become legend, Red knew. The story of the woman who refused to die, the mountain man who stood against corruption, and the community that came together to demand truth and justice. But for now, it was just two people sitting together on a rock, watching a new day begin. 6 months later, the winter had been mild by Colorado standards, but spring was still a welcome relief when it finally arrived. The snow melted from the high peaks, sending cold streams rushing down through the valleys. Wildflowers bloomed in abundance, painting the meadows with color. Red stood on the porch of his cabin, which was a cabin no longer but something more. Kimimela had helped him expand it, adding a proper window with real glass that Sam had brought from Denver. The interior walls now bore decorations from both their worlds. His family daguerreotype still hung above the fireplace, but beside it now were Apache symbols Kimimela had painted, representing home and healing and hope. 2 name plaques hung at the entrance, Red McAllister carved in English, and beside it, Kimimela carved in both English and Apache symbols. Their names side by side, equal and permanent. A horse approached on the trail, and Red's hand went automatically to his rifle before he recognized the rider. John Taltree, making one of his regular visits to check on them and bring news from town and the Apache camps. "Morning," John called, dismounting. "Brought you mail from Sam." "And news." Red took the letters while Kimimela emerged from inside, her belly visibly swollen now with the child that would come in late summer. She greeted John and Apache, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. Chayton? Red asked, knowing John would understand the single-word question. Healed well. Still limps, but he'll live. He and his wife had their second child last month, a daughter. He named her Truth Speaker in honor of what happened. John smiled. He's teaching his son about what he learned, about questioning medicine men, about not blaming women, about choosing hard truth over easy lies. Good, Red said. That's good. And White Cloud retired formally. Red Skywalker has taken over many of his duties, though he says he's too old for visions and will stick to wisdom and common sense. Kimimela laughed at that, the sound light and genuine. Town news? Red asked. Dutch Keller's trial ended, 3 years in territorial prison, but the judge said his testimony against Grayson's network showed genuine remorse. There's talk of a pardon after he serves his time. He earned that much, Red agreed. Took real courage to turn on Grayson. Beth Corrigan's been elected to the town council. First woman ever. She's pushing for fair trade agreements with the Apache. No more exploitation. John grinned. Sam says she's terrifying the other council members. Won't take no for an answer. Sounds like Beth. John's expression grew more serious. And there's one more thing. The territorial governor wants to meet you both. Wants to thank you publicly for exposing the corruption. There's talk of making you some kind of peace representative, mediating between settlers and Apache. Red and Kimimela exchanged glances. The thought of being in the public eye, of having official duties and responsibilities, went against everything about the solitary life Red had built here. But then he thought about what they'd accomplished, about the change that had started in this canyon and spread through the territory, about the children who would grow up in a world slightly more just because two people had refused to back down. We'll think about it, Red said finally, but right now we've got more important things to focus on. He gestured to Kimimela's belly, and John laughed with understanding. After John left, Red and Kimimela stood together on the porch, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. The sun was warm on their faces, and the valley below was alive with the sounds of spring. Scared? Kimimela asked in English, which had become nearly fluent over the winter months. Terrified, Red admitted. Already lost one family, not sure I can survive losing another. You will not lose, Kimimela said firmly. I am strong. Baby will be strong. We survive because that is what we do. Red pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of the pine soap she made and the herbs she used in her healing work. You're right, you always are. Not always, she corrected with a smile, but often enough. They watched the valley for a while longer, then Kimimela spoke again. What should we name baby? If girl, if boy? Red had been thinking about this for weeks. If it's a girl, I'd like to call her Mary Rose, for my wife and daughter, if that's all right with you. Mary Rose, Kimimela repeated, testing the names. An Apache name too. Skyflower, maybe. Mary Rose Skyflower, Red said. I like it. And if boy? Daniel, Red said immediately, for my son. But with an Apache name you choose. Kimimela thought for a moment. Daniel Walking Bear, strong name. Name of father who stands firm, who protects his family. Walking Bear, Red repeated, liking the sound of it. Yeah, that works. As spring turned to summer, their life settled into a rhythm. Red tended his trap lines and taught Kimimela everything he knew about surviving in the high country. She taught him Apache ways, reading weather and the behavior of animals, finding water in places that looked barren, understanding the language of the wind. But more than practical skills, they taught each other about healing, about letting go of the past while honoring it, about building something new from the ashes of what was lost. Visitors came regularly now. Sam Brennan brought supplies and stayed for dinner, swapping stories about Ireland and the famine with Red, while Kimimela listened and learned. Dr. Rivers came to check on her pregnancy and left medical books for her to study, recognizing her gift for healing and wanting to nurture it. Beth Corrigan visited with other women from town, forming friendships that crossed cultural boundaries. And Apache visitors came too. Women seeking Kimimela's healing knowledge. Warriors wanting to hear the story of the tribunal directly from her. children curious about the woman who had spoken truth to power. Red Skywalker came monthly, bringing news and wisdom, slowly building a bridge between two peoples who had spent too long seeing each other as enemies. The birth. Late summer arrived with blazing heat and afternoon thunderstorms that rolled down from the peaks with dramatic fury. Kimamela's time was close now, and Red found himself jumping at every sound, every change in her breathing, every shift in her posture. "You are worse than Mother Hen," Kimamela teased, catching him watching her for the 100th time. "Baby will come when baby is ready. Worrying will not hurry it." "I know," Red said. "Doesn't stop me from worrying." The labor started on a Tuesday morning, early and sudden. Kimamela woke Red with a hand on his shoulder and three quiet words. "Baby is coming." Red's carefully rehearsed plans immediately fell apart. He scrambled for his boots, knocked over the water pitcher, and nearly tripped over his own rifle in his rush to get things ready. Kimamela, in contrast, was perfectly calm. She moved through the cabin gathering the supplies she'd prepared. Clean cloth, boiled water kept warm by the fire, the special herbs she'd collected for pain and bleeding, the cradle board she'd spent months decorating with both Apache beadwork and Irish knot patterns. "Get Beth," Kimamela said, "and Dr. Rivers if he is in town." Red rode to Timber Falls faster than he'd ever ridden, pushing Ginger to her limits. He found Beth at the boarding house and Rivers at Sam's store. Both dropped everything and rode back with him. By the time they returned, Kimamela's labor was progressing. Beth took charge with the calm efficiency of a woman who'd seen dozens of births, sending Red outside despite his protests. "You'll just be in the way," Beth said firmly. "Go chop wood or pace or do whatever men do. We'll call you when there's something to see." Red found himself on the porch with Sam, who'd ridden up with John Talltree and several Apache women who'd come to help. The men stood awkwardly, trying not to listen to the sounds from inside the cabin. "This is the worst part," Sam said. "The waiting, the not being able to help." "I've been through this before," Red said quietly. "With Mary, she labored for 16 hours with Daniel. I thought I'd lose my mind. But she was fine, yeah, and the babe? They were both fine that time." Red's voice carried the weight of all that came after. It was the fever 3 years later that took them. Sam gripped his shoulder. "This time will be different. You'll see." The hours crawled by. Afternoon faded to evening. Red wore a path in the porch boards with his pacing. Inside, the Apache women sang traditional birthing songs, their voices rising and falling in ancient rhythms. And then, as the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, a new sound joined the singing, a baby's cry, strong and indignant and alive. Red's knees went weak with relief. He grabbed the porch railing to steady himself. Beth appeared in the doorway, her face glowing with satisfaction. "Healthy baby girl, 8 pounds if she's an ounce, with a set of lungs that'll wake the dead. Mother's tired but doing well. You want to meet your daughter?" Red entered the cabin on the unsteady legs. Kimamela lay in their bed, her hair damp with sweat, her face exhausted but radiant. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket Beth had knitted, was the smallest human being Red had ever seen. He approached slowly, hardly daring to breathe. The baby had Kimamela's dark hair and what looked like Red's green eyes, though it was hard to tell in the firelight. She was perfect, impossibly, miraculously perfect. "Mary Rose Skyflower," Kimamela said softly, holding the baby up to him. "Your daughter, our daughter." Red took the infant in his arms, marveling at how light she was, how fragile. Tears he didn't know he had in him spilled down his cheeks and into his beard. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I'm your Da. I've been waiting for you." The baby yawned, unconcerned with his tears, and settled against his chest like she'd always belonged there. The legacy 3 years passed in the blink of an eye and the slow accumulation of 1,000 small moments. Mary Rose grew from an infant into a curious, fearless toddler who spoke both English and Apache with equal ease. She had her mother's determination and her father's stubbornness, a combination that kept both parents constantly on their toes. Daniel Walking Bear was born 2 years after his sister, quieter but no less determined, with his father's red hair and his mother's dark eyes. The cabin had expanded again to accommodate the growing family, now more of a small house with separate sleeping rooms and a proper kitchen where Kimamela taught young Apache women both traditional healing and the white man's medical knowledge she'd learned from Dr. Rivers. Red had accepted a position as unofficial mediator between the Apache bands and the territorial government, traveling monthly to meet with chiefs and territorial officials. It wasn't work he'd ever imagined doing, but he was good at it. He understood both worlds now, understood the fears and hopes and misconceptions that kept them apart. And people trusted him because he'd proven he would stand up for what was right regardless of which side it came from. Kimamela had become known throughout the territory as a healer of extraordinary skill. Women, both Apache and white, sought her out for difficult births, strange illnesses, and injuries that other healers couldn't fix. She kept careful records in a journal, documenting both the Apache remedies she'd learned as a child and the medical techniques Dr. Rivers had taught her. It was the beginning of something new, a bridge between traditional healing and modern medicine. On a warm spring afternoon, as Red and Kimamela watched their children play in the meadow below their house, Red Skywalker arrived for one of his regular visits. The old Apache elder was ancient now, well into his 80s, but his mind was still sharp and his presence still carried weight. They sat together on the porch, drinking coffee and watching the children chase butterflies through the wildflowers. "You have built something good here," Red Skywalker said in his careful English. "Not Apache, not white man, something new, something both." "We just did what felt right," Red said. "Took it one day at a time. That is how all great changes happen. One day at a time, one person at a time." The old man smiled. "You know, story of you and Kimamela is told in every Apache camp now. Children ask their grandmothers to tell them about woman who refused to buy and man who stood against whole territory. Stories get bigger in the telling," Red said uncomfortably. "Sometimes," Red Skywalker agreed, "but sometimes stories capture truth that facts miss. Truth is not what happened. Truth is what it means." Kimamela emerged from the house with fresh coffee and settled beside Red, leaning against his shoulder in the comfortable way of people who'd spent years learning each other's rhythms. "And what does our story mean?" she asked Red Skywalker. The old man considered for a longer moment. "Means that sometimes what looks like ending is actually beginning. That being broken open can let new light in. That two people from different worlds can build bridge that others can cross." He gestured to the children playing below. "But most important, story means that courage matters. That one person standing up can inspire others. That refusing to accept injustice can change world." Down in the meadow, Mary Rose shrieked with laughter as Daniel chased her around a pine tree. A group of Apache and white children who'd come with their parents to visit played together without thought to the differences that had divided their parents' generation. "You think it'll last?" Red asked. "This peace we've built? Or will the next generation forget and go back to old hatreds?" "That is unto them," Red Skywalker said, "and up to us to teach them better. To tell them true stories, not lies that make enemies. To show them that people are just people, no matter what they look like or what language they speak." "Heavy responsibility," Red said. "All good things are heavy," the old man replied, "but you are strong. You carry it well." As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold, visitors began to arrive for the evening gathering that had become tradition. Sam Brennan with his latest batch of Irish whiskey, strictly for medicinal purposes, of course. Beth Corrigan with her husband, a shy carpenter she'd married the previous fall. Dr. Rivers with his medical student, a young Apache man named Standing Wolf, who was learning to blend traditional healing with modern medicine. John Taltree arrived with his wife and 3 children, followed by several Apache families and a handful of settler families from the valley. Someone brought a fiddle, someone else brought drums, and as darkness fell, the two musical traditions wove together in melodies that belonged to neither culture individually, but to both collectively. Red stood with Kimamela at the edge of the gathering, watching their community come together in laughter and music and shared food. Mary Rose danced with Apache children in the firelight, while Daniel sat on Sam's lap, listening to stories in an Irish brogue thick enough to cut with a knife. "You ever think about that day?" Kimamela asked. "Day you found me tied to stakes." "Every day," Red admitted. "Think about how close I came to riding past, How easy it would have been to say it wasn't my problem. What made you stop? Red thought about it, trying to find words for something that had been more instinct than decision. I think part of me recognized you. Not knew you, but recognized something. Same thing I felt the first time I saw you, like you were supposed to be there. Like I was supposed to find you. You believe in destiny? Kimimela asked, surprised. You never speak of such things. I believe in moments that matter, Red said. Moments where you can choose to be who you really are, or choose to be less. That day in the clearing, I chose to be the man Mary would have wanted me to be, the man my father raised me to be, and it led to this. He gestured to the gathering, to the children, to the home they'd built together. So maybe not destiny, maybe just making the right choice at the right time. Kimimela leaned her head against his shoulder. You made right choice, and I made right choice too, staying instead of running. We made right choices together. And we'll keep making them, Red said, one day at a time, one choice at a time, until our children are grown and their children are born and the story passes to them. Heavy responsibility, Kimimela echoed Red Skywalker's words with a smile. Yeah, Red agreed, pulling her close. But we're strong. We can carry it. In the firelight, surrounded by community and family and hope, Red McAllister felt something he hadn't felt in 6 years. Complete peace. Not the peace of isolation or the peace of surrender, but the peace that comes from building something worth building, from standing up when it mattered, from choosing love over fear, justice over convenience, truth over comfortable lies. The mountains rose around them, ancient and eternal, watching as they always had. And in the valley below, a new generation grew up learning that the old divisions didn't have to define the future. That courage mattered. That standing up for what was right could change the world. One person at a time, one choice at a time, one day at a time. It was enough. It was everything. And the mountains remembered.